people hear the beautiful story of me and my husband now being together for 23 years, but they don't hear the backstory of what happened before I met him, and the fact that I was in this toxic, emotionally abusive relationship. And what would have happened, Terri, if I never left? What would have happened if I'd stayed in that relationship? I certainly wouldn't be here today. And when I think about how many of us don't either recognize we're in that type of dynamic, or we just accept it and we stay there, it breaks my heart to think how many of us don't make that change and live in quiet desperation.
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show. And I want to start with a question. Do you think that people are just born with confidence? Right? That it's either nature or nurture, it's just the way that you're born and that's it? Or do you think that there's a way that we can build our confidence? Today's very special guest, my friend Lisa Bilyeu, has the answer to that question. She's an entrepreneur. She's a producer. She's a best-selling author, public speaker, and host. She co-founded the billion-dollar brand Quest Nutrition and is the co-founder and president of Impact Theory Studios, a revolutionary digital-first studio that produces wildly entertaining and original content focusing on themes of confidence and empowerment. Lisa built a global audience while creating an impressive slate of content that has been viewed over 500 million times, and that includes her hit digital series, Women of Impact. And I've actually been a guest a couple of times on Women of Impact. Lisa happens to be a very good friend of mine, really just from meeting her in the business. But she has this amazing book out, Radical Confidence, 11 lessons on how to get the relationship, career, and life you want. And it actually just came out in paperback April 30th. So in this interview, we were talking all about confidence, and she actually added a brand new chapter to the paperback, chapter 7, called Leave the Loser, Choose Yourself. And really, this is all about being stuck in toxic relationships, but also how to choose ourselves and what does that actually look like. We had a really fun time shooting this, and I hope that you enjoyed this deep dive with Lisa Bilyeu as much as I enjoyed doing it. I am so excited to welcome back to the Terri Cole Show one of my homies, as she would say, Lisa Bilyeu. Lisa, welcome.
What up, my homie? Oh, I love you so much. It's so good to be here.
So exciting. So many things to talk about. What I was talking about at the top was about the importance of confidence, and just talking about, as women in particular, how this is something that people don't really teach us how to do. They teach us to be humble, and they teach us to be good girls, and they teach us to turn that frown around, and they tell us if we don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And so what's so important about your book and the work that you're doing is we have to just admit that people didn't teach us how to become confident. And that's true. And some people, listen, you have nature and nurture. And of course, some people will be more naturally confident than others. The paperback of your amazing book, Radical Confidence, is coming out. So let's talk about, for you, why was this a topic that was important to write about?
It was so important because people would look at me and think that I was naturally confident, and people used to say, I wish that I had your confidence. And the truth is, if you heard the words that were in my head and how I talked to myself, you would never think that I was confident. So I started to really assess, what is it that people see that they wish they had? And the truth is that I don't allow the fact that I don't have the confidence to stop me. So they see me take action. And what I realized, Terri, over time is that action is what you need to start with, and the confidence becomes the byproduct of taking that action. And so for me, it was when I thought I needed the confidence to get started, that's when I ended up finding myself 8 years in a life that didn't make me happy, that didn't fill me up, because I was waiting to have the confidence to make that change. And eventually what I realized is that no, it actually, you need to take the action first. And so what I want to post to your audience is, if they're waiting for the confidence, they'll normally say, well, I'll wait for the confidence so that I can do X, Y, and Z. What if the confidence never came? Are you okay with not achieving that goal that you say you want to get to, and that you think confidence is the tool to help you get there? If the answer is no, if you know that you're not going to be okay where you blink and in 5 years or 10 years, you haven't gotten to that dream or that goal, then I urge your audience or anyone listening to stop waiting and start taking action. Now, it's easy to say, take action, but when you are so damn scared, how do you take action? And that's where I started to assess, what are the steps that I take? What's the blueprint that I live by in order for me to keep showing up even when I have insecurities and don't feel good enough? And that is what I ended up writing in my book, that I honestly use as like a tool belt anytime that I'm trying anything new, whether it's getting in front of the camera, speaking on stage, or doing anything outside of my comfort zone. I go back to my tool belt and I look at what are the things that I need in order to show up. And eventually, once you keep showing up, you build your competence. And then once you're competent, you then eventually get the confidence.
I love the order though so much, Lisa. I think that there's a lot happening in our interweb world today where people might be skipping the phase of the competence, where we might be cutting corners, and people are like saying they're experts in things that maybe they're not. And I think that there's something when you're an entrepreneur who's been in the trenches, who's had super successful businesses with your husband Tom, and it's like your podcast on your own is super successful, and Women of Impact, and I've been blessed to be a guest multiple times because we just can't stop. But there's something, it's something about the competence piece that I feel like, now I don't want people to get super caught up on it, because what I find is that my actual audience who's drawn to my work are in some ways overcompetent. They feel like they need one more degree. They need one more thing to be good enough. And I think we have to find the middle ground, because it is so much easier personally to be confident when you really know your shit. When you're like, I've been doing this for years. I've been in the trenches. I've seen this a million times. I'm not guessing. This is really data-driven stuff. So I do think that that's important. But I also love the idea of the taking action. And I do think there's an illusion or a misunderstanding out there that if I wait to feel the confidence to make this move, then it's going to be great. And I agree with you. I think that there's nothing I've ever done in my career, all the risks that I've taken, always scared, right? I never did it being like, this is going to be amazing. I always was like, God, there's so many things that could go wrong. But you take the risk anyway, because I think that in my own mind, the idea of having regrets is more scary. The idea of being mediocre is more scary. The idea of playing it safe but never really contributing what I feel like I have to contribute. So where do you think people start, Lisa, when you're talking about people and there's new, you guys, for the paperback, there's actually new content in the paperback, which is super exciting. And I just love it so much. It really, it's so you, but it really spoke to me as well. And it's a chapter 7 that was added called Leave the Loser, Choose Yourself. So with people, because I do find this in my therapy practice, that people who are in unhealthy or toxic or abusive relationships, how damaging that is to confidence. So tell us a little bit about your backstory there and what inspired you to add chapter 7 to the paperback.
Yeah, thanks. Because this is the thing, girl. When I start to do all these interviews with these females and hear how their incredible stories and just hear even just my community, I realized that nothing, and I mean nothing, can erode somebody's confidence faster and more deeply than a toxic person that keeps putting down your dreams, that diminishes your hopes, that makes you feel like you're going crazy, that gaslight you, where they, manipulate you and you don't feel like you're in control of your own mind. Nothing will erode your confidence faster or more deeply than that. And what I realized was that was part of my story that I didn't really share much of. And so people hear the, beautiful story of me and my husband now being together for 23 years, married for 21, building multiple successful businesses together. But they don't hear the backstory of what happened before I met him, and the fact that I was in this toxic, emotionally abusive relationship. And what would have happened, Terri, if I never left? What would have happened if I'd stayed in that relationship? I certainly wouldn't be here today. And when I think about how many of us don't either recognize we're in that type of dynamic, or we just accept it and we stay there, it breaks my heart to think how many of us don't make that change and live in quiet desperation. And so my job is, with my book and everything that I do and stand up for, is that no one should be living in quiet desperation. Nobody should just be taking whatever they're given. You absolutely are the leader of your own life, and I want to encourage you, but very forcefully encourage you, to make a change. But again, telling someone to make a change is easy to say, not easy to do. And so it was important for me to break down what happened in that toxic relationship, how I ended up leaving, but also how I ended up staying for so long. And a
Mm.
big part was that I think a lot of us don't want to address, because it is very shameful to talk about, is the fact that I became toxic in that relationship in order to just feel like I could survive. But
Yep.
in my efforts of becoming toxic, and what I mean is that he was very jealous, so I became very jealous. He was using my vulnerabilities and my insecurities against me. So the only way I could feel like I could stay strong in that relationship was to do the same. Now,
Mm.
what that ended up doing is that's exactly what held me and kept me there. Because if I wasn't in that toxic environment or bringing that toxicity too, maybe I would have left sooner. And so I'm just always trying to show up and be very honest and transparent about what we do, the decisions and choices we make, and how maybe we don't realize the seriousness to that. And I liken a toxic relationship where someone just drips on you over time as like that water on that stone that just
Mm.
drips. Now, when you think about water in and of itself, it can be refreshing. It can be, it literally is what keeps you alive. But now, in what keeps you alive, if that just drips over and over, it then will change the shape of that stone. And that's exactly what happens when you're with somebody that is manipulative. They just drip on you enough that eventually you end up changing the shape of you, and you no longer recognize yourself.
Yes. And it's so scary to see. Let's talk a little bit about red flags with toxic relationships. What are the top ones that you hear from in your community? And I'll share what I hear.
Yeah. Oh, where are the top red flags? It's always the ones that you can't quite pinpoint. So it's almost like the passive aggressive comments and the things where you're like, I think they meant this, but maybe they didn't. So I won't ruffle any feathers. So
Mm.
let's say you're out in public and your partner like kind of mocks your dreams in a joking way to people around you. That's type of manipulation that me and you have spoken about so much is, to me, the hardest one, because you go, am I crazy? Did they really mock me? And then what happens is you bring it up, and then in that moment they were like, oh my God, you're so sensitive. That was
Yeah.
just a joke. Those are the ones that drive me nuts and are the hardest, because you don't quite know how to then combat that. You don't know how to highlight it. You then sometimes may just go internally and go, well, maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe
Right.
that is me not being able to take a joke. And then what happens is you start to minimize yourself, you start to dim yourself, and you start to negotiate, which of course is the thing that I learned from you. You start to negotiate your own freaking boundaries.
Yep. It's so true, especially with people who are using humor, saying something as a joke. So if someone says you're too sensitive, I was, for God's sake, I was only kidding. I think what is, or at least is what I talk about with my therapy clients, that we really have to not be embarrassed to tell the truth, right? Not be embarrassed to say
Mm.
it's not a joke because it wasn't funny. And if you have something to say to me, say it straight, say it, because you mocking me publicly is a passive aggressive way for you to hurt my feelings. And I'm not going to let it work, but I also don't want it to continue. Now, in a relationship that we're talking about, a toxic relationship, I mean, listen, you would only say that if the person wasn't going to then harm you physically. You know what I mean? It really depends on
Of
what
course.
your situation. If you're in a domestic violence situation, then obviously you need to get out safely and slowly and very
Mhm.
stealthily, because that's the only way to actually do it, to be safe. But I think that the standing up and why the work that you're doing and putting out there is so important is because you're shining a light on these things that when it is you, you do feel alone. You do feel like maybe I am just like a snowflake. Maybe I am PMSing, or maybe what they said about me PMSing is true, and that's why I'm responding this way. Where I think that the ongoing problem with toxic relationships, of course, is exactly what you said. We change the shape of ourselves because of what we're experiencing, but we get lost. We end up losing people in our lives, and again, what you were describing is that it happens in this insidious way. It's very slow and steady, and you can't even put your finger on when it went from being great to being a total shit show,
So true.
right?
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. And I think that that's part of the game, quote unquote, right? Is that if you identified it from the get go, you would never fall for it. And,
Right.
I actually just interviewed Mel B from the Spice Girls, right? Now, growing up
So
in the
cool.
90s, girl, like I mean, they invented girl power. So you can imagine. I read her book and she talks about for 10 years, she was in such an abusive relationship
Yeah.
where he would punch her, he would kick her, he would verbally abuse her, he would manipulate her. So she ended up, it was something like she earned, I mean, like something like $84 million in her entire career. By the time she got divorced from him, she had less than $1,000 in her bank account. Now, how does somebody that talks about girl power, that isn't afraid to stand up for herself, like she jokes that she stole a toilet paper roll from Nelson Mandela's house, and that, she was at an event with Prince Charles at the time, obviously now the king, and he made a passive aggressive comment and she freaking calls him on it. And I'm like, you got some freaking big cojones, homie, if you can call the Prince Charles on his passive aggressiveness. That's how ballsy this woman was. So how the hell, and this is what I asked her, how the hell do you go from girl power to powerless? And the truth was, it's bit by bit. They don't come in like, hey, I'm going to bulldoze you. They come in with a charm. That's part of their game that they play. And so for her, when she spoke about the fact that she ended up with $1,000, and I asked her, how did that happen? Her response was, it was slowly. He sees me getting busy. So he starts to say, babe, I'll take care of the finances. You're busy. And you know what? I'm better at numbers than you. So over time, he started to say, you're not good with numbers, little by little, but I'll take it off your plate, babe. Now, in of itself, if it's someone that you actually think of as having a beautiful heart and having like, if you were to show up and say that to somebody, you really mean, I'm here to help you. So you interpret other people's behavior as if you were to say that and do that. So in her eyes, she saw that as a kind gesture that a partner does. But what happens is, over time, she starts to believe that maybe she isn't good at numbers. Over time, she starts to say, well, he's really here for me. You blink, to your point, you go from that first year to year 10, and now you realize he's got full control over your finances. You have no idea where your money's gone. And now you're basically in shit's creek and you have no idea what to do.
Yep.
It becomes that dripping of the stone. They come in like the knight in shining armor. And this is the complexity of what we're talking about, Terry, because I don't want to paint a paintbrush with every single person that does something nice as a manipulation tactic. And so it becomes super tricky on how do you know when someone's being authentic or it's being a card that they play in the game of manipulation.
Right.
And that becomes the trickiness.
I think that part of this, and you and I talked about this on Women of Impact in one of our interviews, about how she was positively projecting onto him her qualities of decency and being like a regular, normal person.
Yes.
He didn't have those qualities, obviously. And from the beginning, and I know you talk about this as well, with the gaslighting and the love bombing. And it's like, the knight in shining armor, as you just said, they come in and you're like, oh, thank God, someone who's going to help me manage all these things. And especially when Mel B became very famous. I mean, this is a woman in her 20s. Like, these were young people becoming incredibly famous worldwide and making lots and lots of money. And all of that stuff at the time was like, I mean, had to be incredibly heady. And if you didn't come from that, it's not like you'd have people in place to help you or know how to find people, right? Like today, neither one of us would be like, yeah, let my uncle do the books for the business. Do you know what I mean? We would
Right.
probably not do that. But when you're younger, you don't really know. So let's bring this back to your own advice, sort of how do people, when they're starting to build confidence or they're trying to build confidence, how do they create momentum like in according to, because the book itself is basically giving us 11 lessons on
Mhm.
how to build our confidence. So once we start, how do we keep momentum going?
Yeah, I think it all comes to what's the goal, because your goal would dictate your actions. So
Mm,
understanding very clearly though what that goal is going to be the first step. So even if it's like I want to feel good about myself, what does that mean? Like actually write down what that means, and very specifically, right? So you got the mission and then your goal. So for me, because I think in business terms, it really helps me keep moving forward instead of getting stuck in my own feelings.
mhm,
When I think about a goal, it's what? So what is that goal? How much and by when? So if you say, I want to feel good about myself, okay, that's the what. But like how much and by when? So by the next 30 days, I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror and say something kind to myself automatically 4 times. All right, now you know exactly what that goal is. Within the
right.
next 30 days, you want to say something nice to yourself 4 times. Great. How do you actually get there? So now it allows you to say, what is that blueprint I need to take and those stepping stones in order to get to that goal? So your goals will dictate your behavior. So now think about, let's say, I want to have the guts to set a boundary with my toxic partner. Okay, how do you do that? Number one, you may not even feel like you have the confidence to do it. So before you even talk to them, you have to
Mhm.
build that armor, if you will, to get
Yeah.
yourself geared up to be able to be prepared for that discussion. What would that look like? Okay, so for me, I would take usually around, let's say, 30 days. And I'm going to say, every single day, I'm going to do something that validates myself, because often we'll use external validation as a way to feel good about ourselves. But that actually means that you're not showing up in your true authenticity. So, going back to the drawing board, how do I build that foundation of confidence? I need to validate myself every single day. What does that look like? So that's going to be different for each person. But for me, the way that I was able to validate myself was
Yeah.
like fill in the blank. I'm the type of person that, fill in the blank, and then do it. So I said,
Mm,
I'm the type of person that says I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to do it. And so the gym became the thing because I find that immense emotional strength by connecting my body and my mind
mhm.
together. So I lift weights. So that was my reasoning for the gym being the very specific thing that I wanted to do. So I just said, Lisa, do 5 or 10 push ups every day. That is on me. That has nothing to do with any external source. That has
Right.
nothing to do with anybody else. So now what I do is when I do it, day one, day two, day three, day four, by like day eight, I feel good about myself that I was the type of person that said I was going to go to the gym and do push
Yep.
ups, and I did it. So that's number one. That ends up building your confidence in yourself to
Yep.
rely on yourself and not rely on external people. Then I would say, look at your health. I know that's a weird one to say, but like
Mhm.
you cannot show up. You actually said it earlier, right? Maybe you are PMSing. Don't feel badly about it, but you
Mhm.
gotta know where your hormones are. Let's face it, how many of us have been hangry, where we've, like said something out of annoyance because we're just hungry? Okay, that's a response just to hunger. Can you imagine how we feel if we've lacked sleep, if we haven't eaten well?
Yeah.
All of these things will contribute to how you feel about yourself. So that's going to be the second thing, is just look at your health, look at if you're doing any self-care, because you cannot go out and
Mm,
set boundaries and stand up for yourself if you don't have that emotional strength. So that's also going to be the second thing. Then how do you actually show up? For me, I use fashion and clothes as a very instrumental tool in my confidence tool belt, because imagine, paint a picture. Lisa version 1 shows up in scruffy clothes. They're kind of dirty, they're baggy. I don't feel any certain way about it. You can even hear the way my tone is describing those clothes, right? I put those on, and now I'm required to walk in a room and stand up for myself with
mm,
my toxic boyfriend. Do you think I can? Or do you think I'm going to feel a little uncomfortable? I'm going to like be wishy washy. Okay, now Lisa version number 2. I put on some bad bitch boots, and I put on some tight pants, and I put on my jewelry, and I do my makeup and I do my hair, right? You can even hear in my tone, the way that I describe it,
Yeah.
it's empowering. So now when I walk into that room, I've already built my self-confidence to be able to handle a conversation. Now, that doesn't mean the conversation is going to go great. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have insecurity. You
Mm-hmm.
probably will. And that is then the third piece, where when you walk into that room and you're going to have that discussion, once you've built
Mm-hmm.
that foundation that I've just described, now you go in as the learner. Now, what I mean by that is you say the words to your partner, you address the issue, but it probably isn't going to go according to plan, right? Like they're going to say something that you're not going to expect. You really hope that they respond in one way and they respond in the complete opposite way.
Mm-hmm.
How on earth do you sustain your emotional sobriety where
Mm-hmm.
you can control your emotions and you don't derail? And that you can, because we all know, if you end up losing your shit when you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to, it's one more thing they can use against you and
Yep.
call you sensitive. So
Mm-hmm.
if you can hold your own, if you can maintain your emotional sobriety during those moments and you go in as the learner, then no matter what happens, even if it's things that you don't expect, you can leave that going, well, I learned a lesson. I know now to approach them in this way. I know now in order to build a boundary, I actually need to phrase it more like this. And you become more powerful for it. And then the
Right.
next time you do it, right? My favorite movie is Karate Kid. Wax on, wax off. This all becomes a practice that
Right.
you keep doing, that you keep learning, you keep growing, and that eventually you will be so damn good that no one will be able to stop you.
Right. Oh, it's so good. I love it. And I see that it's such a great visual of we anytime that we prepare for success, we actually prepare. You don't expect to sit down and just write a book. You don't expect to, no good lawyer goes into court not looking at the facts and not knowing. And this is the same thing. So what you're describing is really knowing yourself to go, what am I wearing when I feel confident? What does my hair look like? What do I look like? Because this is, in a way, Lisa, I agree with you. I think that this is our armor in the world, right? It's representative, and it doesn't have to be something that keeps people out. But the way that we present ourselves is saying something, and it is projecting something before we even get into a conversation or a negotiation or whatever it is that you're doing. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't really think about, that you talk about in the book, where it's almost like going through the ritual of being your own hype girl by taking care of yourself. Yes, going to the gym. Yes, caring about your physical wellness. And again, it's not about the size of your ass, right? It's about how you feel and I can tell you this from aging, right? I just turned 60, and it's like,
Girl, I want to just say before you go on, holy smoke. You make 60 look amazing. And I don't just mean that from a, physical standpoint. I mean that you work so damn hard on your mind to be the learner. And look, growing up, I always saw people in their 50s and 60s as they've just given up on life. And so
yeah,
I just want to freaking applaud you for how you keep showing up. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's amazing.
why, thank you. No, please. I appreciate it. But it really is like coming up to this big birthday. To me, it didn't really feel like a big birthday because I'm not much of a birthday person, but I always feel like myself. But what I notice is that the importance of being physically well and seeing people in my age group, and Vic is 10 years older than me, right? So friends of his too, people who haven't prioritized their health, or they have been unlucky in health, because some people are trying to prioritize their health and they end up with cancer anyway. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And yet I see the freedom and the confidence in staying physically fit. Listen, I feel like it's a privilege that I'm well enough, just health wise, to be able to do that. But I feel like this goes along with what you're saying with going to the gym and making that commitment to yourself that you're going to go, that you're going to do push-ups, that you're going to whatever goals, as you obviously your goals change and grow as you do,
Mm-hmm.
but that's for yourself. And really, Lee, so much of why I love this book, and so much in this book, you're really talking about healthy boundaries. To be confident really does mean that you have healthy internal boundaries, meaning you keep your word to yourself. You say, I am a person that goes to the gym when they say they're going to go to the gym, and you do it. but it's also so much about healthy boundaries with others and creating boundaries in these unhealthy relationships. Because listen, all of us, all of us come from families, right? Like nobody like came from a family that was like super duper high functioning and healthy. It's unlikely, or maybe I just
Yeah.
haven't met them yet. Like we all have our crap, you know what I mean? That we come with, and that we have to get over and sort of differentiate from. And for you, how was that? Like, what was the expectation in your family system for you? And were there stereotypes that you needed to break away from, coming from a traditional Greek family, to become who you've become?
Yeah, 1,000%. And I love that you really identified the boundaries thing, because I think that that's part of it. We maybe haven't even been learned or taught boundaries, or we actually have been taught very unhealthy boundaries. And so for me, growing up Greek Orthodox, there was a lot of pressure on I shoulds, right? I should do this because I'm a Greek woman. I should do X, Y, and Z. And I never had the boundaries because in my mind, I always thought, well, I have to. Like, it would be disrespectful and against my Greek culture for me to push back on my father if he told me to, not marry the American man, which is exactly what happened. I met Tom, love of my life. I'm a very traditional Greek. And so he went and asked for my dad's blessing, and my dad said no. And so as my dad says no to marrying,
Wow.
he turned around and he said, look, Andres, I very much respect you. That's the name of my father. I very much respect you, but I'm still going to ask her. Now, growing up, you never go against your father and his wishes. He is the patriarch of the family. And so in that moment, I broke into tears when after Tom proposed, and he's like, look, I just need you to know your dad doesn't want us to get married. And so in that moment, that was almost the first time where I had to sit and go, I have lived my life to try to be the amazing Greek daughter. And I think I'm a good human, right? I think I
Mm-hmm.
treat my dad very well. I respect him. I show up. I, very much appreciate my family. But wait a minute. He doesn't want me to marry this man. Okay, let's just go to first principles. Let me remove all emotion from this situation and just ask myself, why does my dad not want me to marry him? What is his base assumption that he thinks that me marrying my husband, Tom, is going to be a mistake? So I just went through first principles on base assumptions. Okay, my dad came from a tiny village in the mountains of Cyprus. He didn't see any girls really work because that was how the culture was. They don't go to school because there was no contraception, so they have babies very young. They rely on their husbands to provide for them, and they stay home. And
Right.
everybody is of the same village, of the same culture. So
Yeah.
my dad's base assumption is that if you come from different cultures, it can't work. That isn't about me as a human. That isn't about Tom as a human. That is just his base assumption of marriage. So the question is, do I agree with his base assumption?
Right.
And the answer is no. But here's the great news. He highlighted something that I hadn't considered. So instead of just pushing back, which sometimes we do, right? Like when you're setting boundaries or something like that, you either will dismiss it completely, like go in like a bull in a china shop and like, I'm not listening. Or you do the opposite and listen to them and very much let someone erode your boundaries. But what I really learned is if I just hear him out, maybe there's a lesson here. And so that lesson really was, it's going to be difficult to have a marriage if you come from a very traditional Greek culture and the other person doesn't. And so that actually just gave me a lesson, going back to the learner thing, that gave me a lesson to go, okay, maybe I need to pay attention to this. And I was dismissing it. Thank you, Dad, for that lesson. But the second part was where I go to just first principles. I hate to say it out loud, but this is how I think. If nature takes its course, my dad will die before me. So now, what happens if my dad dies and I'm in my 40s and 50s and I said no to the man that I thought was my true love because I wanted to make my dad happy?
Mm-hmm.
So once I'd done that internal work, because I'm never ready and prepared to set a boundary or really, mark that line unless I've done that internal work.
Right.
Because I think a lot of us find that our boundaries are negotiable. Let's talk about them. And the truth was, my boundary of me marrying my husband was a non-negotiable for me. I will marry this man. I hope that you approve. I really love you so much that I hope you give me your blessing. But this isn't up for debate. I am going to marry this man. And when you can
Right.
do it with no emotion like that, when you can do it with utter respect, because I said to my dad, I've heard you out, Dad. I understand where you come from. Thank you for helping me think through this.
Hmm.
I love you so much, Dad. But I also love Tom, and I'm still going to marry him. Here's then the tricky thing, Terry, that people don't want to talk about. I can say this now, having been married for 21 years in a very successful, happily marriage. But there's also another story, which we end up not actually working out. And my dad is right. Now,
Hmm.
in that scenario, you better believe I'm still damn proud that I took my shot. You better believe, to your point that you'd said about regret, I don't have a regret now because at
Right.
least I know, oh, I tried it and it didn't work out. And I just did an interview recently with a death doula. I don't know if you know what a death doula is, but they help people kind of like die basically with,
Love it.
dignity and respect and like not with, anxiety. And the number one thing that people do is they regret the things they didn't do.
Yep.
They don't regret the things they did. And so, again, I'm just such a thirst for knowledge and growth that if I
Mm.
take that as fact, now people hopefully listening can use that as almost like a driving force, right? That push. You even said, how do you keep going? That becomes the driving force that forces you to move forward. And if everything fails and you've set a boundary, at least you can be damn proud of yourself that you gave it a shot and you're not going to live with regrets.
Yes, it's so true. Because the thing is, you can do something else. If it didn't work out with Tom, you could meet someone else. But again, it makes so much sense to me that on people's deathbeds, the thing they regret the most is the things they didn't do.
Mm,
Nobody's going to be like, wow, I wish I self abandoned more. Like, nobody's saying that. You know what I mean? They're really
mhm.
not. It's about having the courage and realizing, as you teach us in this book, that having radical confidence is up to us. And there is a way to create it. And you guys, book is available, the paperback. Radical Confidence is the name of the book. 11 lessons on how to get the relationship, career, and life you want, from my friend Lisa Bilyeu. Lisa, tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, girl. So, I just freaking adore and love you. You've taught me so much. Our chats and our discussions are exactly what fills up my heart. And so, before I just pitch, where to go get my book, I just urge everybody to find friends that they feel supported,
Mm.
that can help them build their strength. Because there's just like we've been talking about this whole thing, even though it was more about relationships, toxic people in your life are toxic people, whether it's a friend or a boyfriend or a family member. And so,
Yes.
find friends that really lift you up, that allow you to build your radical confidence to get stronger. And so I just want to, say that I really have found that in our friendship, and I admire and respect you so much. And so you've allowed me to continue on my radical confidence journey as well, homie. So, but if
Right
people want to
on.
pick up the book, they can get it anywhere books are sold. And for the week of my pre-order and launch week, people can actually go to radicalconfidence.com and get a bunch of bonuses. Me and my husband did an exclusive hour coaching course on relationships. And so you can get that for free. You can get the workbook for free that goes along with the book. And then also I'm offering 3 months of ad-free of Women of Impact podcast. And that's all exclusive for the bonuses. So if you go over to radicalconfidence.com, you can get all of that for free.
Awesome. All right, go to it, you guys. It's happening right now. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I love you. I appreciate you.
Love you too, homie. Thanks, guys.